A century closes. In the second half of the 20th century, Illinoisans were still fighting for equal rights for all. In the 1960s, Illinois Senator Everett Dirksen helped pass national laws that secured rights for minorities. In 1966, Martin Luther King Jr. led protests against unfair housing rules for African Americans in Chicago. King was a leader in the effort to secure civil rights for minorities in the South. To show that injustice existed in the North, too, he came to Chicago. African Americans in Chicago and other cities were denied the chance to live in some all-white neighborhoods. King marched with supporters into all-white neighborhoods to protest this injustice. His marches angered some residents and led to violence. Point to the picture of Everett Dirksen to the left. He helped pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Violence in the cities. In April 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered in Memphis, Tennessee. Riots broke out in Chicago. 9 people died and about 500 were injured. Rioting also occurred in Carbondale, Alton, and East St. Louis. Because of this violence, many people moved away from cities. By 1970, more Americans lived in suburbs than in cities. People also protested United States involvement in the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War lasted from 1957 to 1975, but most of the fighting involving U.S. troops took place from 1965 to 1969. During the Democratic National Convention of 1968, thousands of people filled the streets of downtown Chicago to protest the war. In front of television cameras, police and protesters fought on the streets of Chicago. A national television audience watched the violence in shock. Point to the picture at the top of the page. The 1968 Democratic Convention took place August 26 to August 29th. Outside the convention, thousands of anti-war protesters clashed with over 11,000 Chicago police, as well as Army troops, National Guardsmen, and Secret Service. A new Constitution. In the late 1960s, Illinoisans decided it was time for a new state constitution. The existing constitution had been passed in 1870. People believed a more up-to-date document was needed. The new constitution of 1970 aimed to protect the rights of all people. It gives women equal rights and forbids discrimination against those with disabilities. In 1976, voters elected James Thompson governor. He was re-elected 3 more times, making him the first Illinois governor to serve 4 terms. In 1980, Illinois native Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States. Reagan was born in Tampico, Illinois, and grew up in Dixon, Illinois. He served 2 terms as president. Point to the picture of Ronald Reagan to the left. He grew up in Dixon, Illinois. Today, visitors can walk through his boyhood home in Dixon. Illinois' population decreased while Thompson and Reagan were in office. In 1950, Illinois was the 3rd most populous state in the nation. By 1980, it was the 6th. Illinois lost people and jobs to growing states in the South and Southwest. In the 1980s, crop prices fell and the value of farmland dropped. Some Illinois farmers had no choice but to sell their land and pay debts. Illinois industries went through hard times too. Many factories closed and workers lost their jobs. However, manufacturers remained among the state's top employers. The state also worked to encourage the growth of other kinds of businesses. Tourism in Galena, Springfield, Chicago, and other cities provided jobs in hotels, restaurants, and other businesses. New industries devoted to providing computer and other high-technology services provided more jobs. The printing and publishing industry is another one of the state's top employers. The 21st century. At the start of the 21st century, Illinois remained a transportation center. As more and more people traveled by air, Illinois looked for ways to handle increased air traffic. Point to the picture to the right. James R. Thompson served as governor of Illinois for 14 years, from 1977 to 1991. Point to the fact box at the top of the page. Big suburbs. Some of Illinois' largest cities are suburbs. Chicago and Rockford top the list of Illinois' largest cities. After Chicago and Rockford come 2 Chicago suburbs. Aurora is home to about 143,000 people. It is the 3rd largest city in Illinois. Naperville's population is 128,000, which makes it the 4th largest. The state's population continued to grow as well. In 2000, more than 12 million people lived in Illinois. That is about 1 million more than in 1990. For the first time in 50 years, the population of Chicago grew too. At the same time, Illinoisans worked to protect their environment. In the 1990s, cleanup efforts greatly improved the health of Illinois rivers. This gave new hope to endangered river species like the river otter. Illinoisans also replanted and restored pieces of the tall grass prairie that once covered the state. For thousands of years, the rivers and prairies sustained the people who lived in the area. Today, Illinoisans are working to give new life back to the environment. With their efforts, the people and the environment of Illinois will continue to flourish well into the future. Point to the picture to the left. Since 1975, volunteers have been working to restore the land around Fermilab, pictured below, to the native tallgrass prairie that was once there. Point to the Thompson Center at the top of the page. To honor James Thompson, Illinois named one of its biggest government buildings after him. The James R. Thompson Center in Chicago is home to many state offices.